Chapter 1. Collision in the alley. Elena Rivera hurried down the narrow alley, her heels clicking against the cobblestones. The city had a way of feeling alive and dangerous all at once, and she preferred the crowded streets where she could blend in. Tonight, however, the shortcut seemed like the fastest way home. She had no idea how quickly her life could change. A shadow moved too quickly from the corner of her eye. Before she could react, a man lunged at her, demanding her purse. Fear surged through her chest as she tried to step back, but the alley offered no escape. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her attacker and threw him aside. Elena stumbled, but caught herself against the wall. Her heart raced as she looked up at the man who had intervened. His face was partially in shadow, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made her stomach twist. He did not speak. He simply stared at her attacker until the man scrambled away and vanished into the darkness. Elena's pulse did not slow even as the alley fell silent again. She wanted to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. There was something about him that was both terrifying and magnetic. She sensed power in every controlled movement he made, a quiet strength that commanded attention. He finally turned to her, and in that brief moment, their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of danger, and perhaps of something more fragile beneath the surface. Elena took a cautious step back. She did not know who he was, but she felt an inexplicable pull toward him. Before she could speak, he nodded once and disappeared into the shadows of the alley. Elena was left standing there, her purse clutched to her chest, her mind racing. The city suddenly felt bigger, darker, and yet somehow more alive than ever before. She did not know his name, and she did not know if she would ever see him again. But she could not shake the feeling that her life had just shifted in a way she could not yet understand. Chapter 2. Shadows of the past. Elena sat by the window of her small apartment, staring at the city lights that flickered like distant stars. The alley, the mugging, and the man who had saved her all lingered in her mind. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if to hold the pieces of her own shaken courage together. She had always kept people at a distance. Growing up, trust had been a fragile thing, easily broken and painfully repaired. Friends came and went, and love had always seemed like a risk too great to take. Yet something about tonight's encounter unsettled her. The man in the alley had a presence that lingered, a quiet weight that made her pulse quicken even now. Across the city, Dominic Moretti leaned against the leather seat of his car, watching the same streets he had walked countless times before. Power and control came easily to him, and a world that demanded both. But there were moments, like tonight, that reminded him of the emptiness beneath it all. Saving Elena had been instinctive, yet her startled eyes and tentative trust stirred something unfamiliar inside him. Dominic's life had been built on loyalty, fear, and calculated choices. He carried the weight of a family legacy that demanded ruthlessness. People knew him as untouchable, untamed, and cold, yet very few had ever glimpsed the man beneath the reputation. He rarely allowed anyone in, and he certainly did not allow himself to imagine a life beyond the walls he had built. Elena moved to the couch, her thoughts circling the encounter. She wondered what had driven him to intervene. Was it chance, duty, or something more? Even as fear lingered in the edges of her mind, curiosity crept in. She had seen kindness in his actions, a stark contrast to the dangerous aura that surrounded him. The contradiction left her unsettled and intrigued. Outside, the city thrummed with life, unaware of the collision of two worlds. Elena and Dominic were strangers in the same night, yet something intangible had connected them. Each of them carried shadows from the past, walls built to protect themselves, and a longing for connection they could not yet name. Elena finally rested her head against the couch cushion, exhausted but unable to sleep. She knew that the memory of the alley would follow her. In the quiet of her apartment, she allowed herself a small, unspoken hope that the man who had entered her life might somehow remain a part of it. Chapter 3. A dangerous proposal. The next evening, Elena's routine was interrupted by a knock at her apartment door. She hesitated, heart fluttering, and approached cautiously. Through the peephole, She saw a tall man in a dark coat. Her pulse quickened. He looked familiar, yet dangerous, and she instinctively knew this was the man from the alley. Dominic Moretti stood there, his expression unreadable. "Elena Rivera," he said evenly. "We need to talk." His voice carried authority, yet there was no anger in it, only a quiet insistence that made her step aside to let him in. Once inside, he explained why he had sought her out. Her encounter in the alley had been more than a random mugging. Someone had been watching her. Someone with intentions that could put her in serious danger. He had been there at the right moment, but Dominic wanted her to understand that it was not a mere coincidence. Elena listened, a mixture of fear and disbelief coursing through her. She had never imagined being involved in anything so serious. Her life had always been predictable, quiet, safe, and now it was unraveling before her eyes. "I can protect you," Dominic said, "but you need to trust me." His gaze was steady and unwavering. There was no room for argument. His offer was a lifeline, and Elena realized she had no other choice. She hesitated, weighing fear against the instinct to survive. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she said softly. "I trust you." Dominic's presence was commanding and protective. He outlined the precautions they needed to take, the ways she could stay safe, and the steps he would take to keep her out of harm's way. His tone was firm, yet beneath it, there was a trace of concern that caught her attention. She sensed that he cared more than he let on. As the evening progressed, the tension between them was palpable. Every glance, every subtle gesture carried weight. Elena noticed how careful he was, how he scanned every corner of the room, his awareness never faltering. And yet, there were moments when his eyes softened, revealing a glimpse of the man behind the reputation. By the time Dominic left, Elena felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Her life had changed in a single night. She had agreed to let a man she barely knew into her world, yet there was a spark of something she could not ignore. It was the beginning of a partnership that would challenge her fears, her instincts, and eventually, her heart. Chapter 4. Learning to trust. Elena found herself growing accustomed to Dominic's presence in her life, though she would never have admitted it out loud. Each day brought a mixture of relief and tension. She could no longer ignore the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room, and the way her thoughts lingered on him long after he had left. Dominic, on his part, maintained a careful balance of distance and protection. He never overstepped, yet his watchful eyes seemed to follow her movements even when she thought he was elsewhere. There were moments when he let small gestures slip through his guard, a reassuring hand on her shoulder, a quiet warning when danger was near. Each gesture was brief, almost imperceptible, but they lingered in Elena's mind. One evening, as they walked through a quiet park for an errand, Elena caught a glimpse of a side of him few had ever seen. A stray dog approached them cautiously, and Dominic knelt, offering it a gentle hand and a soft voice. Elena froze, shocked. This was the same man who commanded fear in the streets, yet here he was, tender and careful with a fragile creature. "It's rare to see you like that," Elena said softly, her voice barely above the rustling leaves. Dominic glanced at her, his eyes guarded. "People only see what I allow them to see," he replied. "Most of the world is better off fearing me. It keeps them alive." Elena understood the truth behind his words. He had built walls to protect himself and others. Yet in that brief moment, she saw a flicker of something more, an openness he rarely offered. Her heart, which she had worked so hard to shield, began to soften. Days turned into weeks, and trust slowly began to take root. Elena noticed how Dominic's presence made her feel safe, yet she never felt controlled or diminished. He respected her opinions, listened when she spoke, and even sought her perspective in small matters. It was unfamiliar, but comforting. Dominic, meanwhile, struggled with the emotions Elena stirred within him. He had never allowed himself to care so deeply for someone outside his world, and the intensity of his feelings was both exhilarating and terrifying. He feared that getting close could put her in danger, yet keeping his distance felt impossible. By the time they shared a quiet dinner one evening, The air between them was charged with unspoken tension. Every glance and brush of hands carried weight. Elena realized that trust was no longer a theoretical concept, but a tangible connection she felt with Dominic. She still feared for her safety. Yet she could not deny the growing warmth in her chest whenever he was near. In learning to trust him, Elena was also learning to trust herself. She was discovering that even in the shadows of danger, it was possible to find moments of light and connection. And for Dominic, every step Elena took toward him was a step into a world he had never dared to enter, a world where his heart could be touched without the violence and fear that defined his life. Chapter 5. Secrets and confessions. Ella had grown accustomed to Dominic's presence in her life, yet there was still a part of him that remained impenetrable, like a fortress she was not allowed to enter. She had always known that everyone carried secrets, but she was beginning to realize just how heavy the burdens could be for someone like him. It started with a mistake. Elena had been searching through a drawer to find a spare charger when she noticed a small, leather-bound notebook tucked away in a hidden compartment. She hesitated, knowing she was crossing a line, yet curiosity got the better of her. The pages were filled with careful handwriting, detailing names, dates, and events that painted a picture of a life she had only glimpsed in fragments. She read about choices made under pressure, about alliances and betrayals, about moments of grief that had shaped the man she was beginning to care for. When Dominic discovered her reading it, he did not yell or demand it back. He simply closed the notebook, his gaze intense. "I should not have left that here," he said quietly. His voice held an emotion she had never heard before: vulnerability. "Some of this is not meant for anyone to see." Elena met his eyes, feeling the weight of the trust and danger interwoven in his life. "I did not mean to invade," she said softly. I wanted to understand." For the first time, Dominic allowed himself to open a small window into his world. He spoke of his family, the pressures that had hardened him, and the losses that had left scars beneath the surface. He revealed the loneliness that accompanied power and the fear that trusting someone could lead to more pain. Every word was measured, yet behind them was a raw honesty that made Elena's chest tighten. "You do not have to understand it all," he said finally. "You only need to know that I care. That is the part I want you to see." Elena reached for his hand, a small gesture that conveyed everything she could not put into words. "I see you," she whispered, "all of you." In that moment, the barrier between them began to crumble. The notebook, once a symbol of secrecy, had become a bridge. Elena realized that Dominic's strength did not lie only in his power, but in the courage it took to allow someone into the shadows of his heart. The evening stretched into quiet conversation, laughter breaking through the tension that had always surrounded him. Elena noticed the way he relaxed, how his posture softened, and how the corners of his eyes hinted at a gentleness reserved only for her. By the time she left for the night, the city lights seemed less harsh and more inviting. The walls she had built around herself wavered slightly, and she felt a budding certainty that this connection, as complicated and dangerous as it might be, was real and worth exploring. For Dominic, the revelation was equally transformative. Allowing someone to see the truth of him was terrifying. Yet in Elena's presence, he discovered a freedom he had never known, a chance to be vulnerable without losing himself. Chapter 6. The threat within. The following week brought a sense of unease that Elena could not shake. Dominic had warned her that danger often lingered closer than it appeared, but she had never truly understood what that meant until now. Small things started to unsettle her, shadows that moved too deliberately, distant footsteps that echoed too loudly, and the feeling of being watched even in her own apartment. One evening, as she returned from a late grocery run, a figure lurked near the entrance of her building. She froze, her heartbeat quickening. Dominic appeared seemingly from nowhere, his presence a shield against the invisible threat. His eyes were sharp, scanning every corner, every street lamp, and every passerby with calculated precision. Elena had come to trust his instincts, and in that moment, she knew she was safe because he was near. "I told you it would not be safe to walk alone," Dominic said quietly, his voice low and steady. There was no anger in it, only concern and a hint of frustration at the risks she had unknowingly taken. Elena swallowed her fear and nodded. I understand now, she said. I didn't realize how serious it could get. Over the next few days, the threat escalated. Anonymous messages, small break-ins, and unsettling encounters made it clear that someone from Dominic's world had taken an interest in her. She could see the tension in Dominic's jaw, the way he moved with a quiet, coiled energy that made him both dangerous and compelling. The more danger she faced, the more she realized how much she relied on him. Yet at the same time, she felt the stirrings of independence. She wanted to protect herself, to learn how to navigate this shadowed world, even if only in small ways. Dominic noticed this, and while he admired her courage, he struggled with the urge to shield her completely from every danger. One night, after a close encounter with an intruder at her apartment, Elena found herself leaning against Dominic's chest as he scanned the area for threats, his arms wrapped around her protectively. But his eyes revealed a deeper emotion, fear for her, worrying, and an intensity she had never experienced from anyone before. I cannot lose you, he admitted quietly, almost to himself. Not like this. Elena lifted her head, meeting his gaze. You won't lose me, she said softly. We can face this together. For the first time, they acted as more than protector and protected. They were a team, relying on each other's instincts, courage, and trust. The threat that had seemed so overwhelming now also served as a test of their growing bond. Danger had a way of revealing truth, and it showed them that they were stronger together than apart. As the night settled into an easy quiet, Elena realized that, while fear had brought them closer, it was the trust and care between them that made the shadowed streets of the city feel just a little safer. Dominic's world was dangerous, but in his presence, she found a place where vulnerability could coexist with strength. Chapter 7. Moments of tenderness after the recent threats. The city felt quieter, almost fragile, as if it too was holding its breath. Elena and Dominic had grown closer, their connection deepening with each passing day. There was a comfort in their shared routines, in the small exchanges that went beyond words. One evening, they walked through a secluded part of the park, the air crisp and carrying the scent of fallen leaves. Dominic's hand brushed against Elena's, not intentionally at first, but neither withdrew. They walked side by side, the silence between them filled with unspoken understanding. They found a bench beneath a large oak tree, its branches swaying gently in the wind. Dominic sat first, then Elena, careful to leave a small space between them. She noticed how, even in casual moments, he exuded a presence that was both protective and commanding. Yet tonight, there was a softness in his expression, a warmth he allowed only in her presence. Do you ever get tired of all this? Elena asked quietly, her voice almost blending with the rustling leaves. Dominic considered her question, his gaze distant. Sometimes, he admitted, the world I live in leaves little room for peace, but moments like this make it bearable. Elena felt her heart tighten. She reached for his hand and found that he did not pull away. Their fingers intertwined naturally, a silent acknowledgement of the trust and care that had grown between them. They shared stories of their childhoods, their dreams, and the fears they rarely voiced to anyone else. Dominic spoke of losses that had shaped him, of moments that had hardened him, and Elena listened, offering empathy without judgment. In turn, she shared pieces of herself, the parts she usually kept hidden, and he listened with unwavering attention. Later, as they walked back toward the city streets, a quiet intimacy settled between them. It was in the way Dominic adjusted his pace to match hers, in the small brush of his hand against hers, and in the way they exchanged glances that lingered longer than necessary. That night, Elena realized that trust and tenderness could exist even in a life filled with danger. Dominic's reputation was fearsome, yet the moments he allowed himself to show vulnerability revealed a side of him that was reserved only for her. Dominic, on the other hand, felt the stirrings of something he had never experienced. Caring for someone so deeply had been terrifying, But the connection with Elena was undeniable. She had become a part of him in ways that power and fear never could. Their bond was quietly growing, strong enough to face the threats of the world, yet fragile enough to require care, attention, and mutual trust. In each other, they had found a haven, a momentary escape from the darkness that always threatened to surround them. Chapter 8. Conflicted hearts. The weight of Dominic's world pressed heavily on both of them. Elena could feel it in the way he tensed whenever he received a call or a message that hinted at trouble. She knew that loving him meant stepping into a life shadowed by danger, and she could not ignore the fear that came with it. Dominic struggled with his own emotions. Caring for Elena had become inevitable, yet every step closer to her left him vulnerable in a way he had never allowed himself. His world demanded control, and vulnerability was a luxury he could rarely afford. The thought of losing her because of the life he led haunted him. Elena noticed the subtle shifts in him, a furrowed brow, a pause before he spoke, the distant look in his eyes when he thought she was not watching. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him that they could face everything together. Yet she feared overstepping, making her presence feel like a burden. One night, after a tense encounter with an unknown threat, they sat together in her apartment. Dominic's hand hovered over hers, unsure whether to reach out. Elena finally took his hand, letting her fingers intertwine with his. "We don't have to face everything alone," she said softly. "I am here, Dominic. Whatever comes, we face it together." He exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly. "I want that," he admitted, his voice low. "But this world, it does not forgive weakness. I cannot promise you safety in the way you deserve." Elena tightened her grip on his hand. "I know, and I am not asking for perfect safety. I am asking for honesty, for trust, for us." For a moment, silence settled over them, thick with the weight of unspoken fears and desires. In that quiet, they both realized that love in their world was not simple. It was a choice made despite danger, a commitment that required courage and vulnerability. As the night deepened, they sat side by side, finding comfort in the presence of each other. Their hearts were conflicted, pulled between fear and longing. Yet that tension only made their connection more real. They understood that love was not just a refuge from danger, but a challenge that demanded them to trust, to fight, and to open themselves fully despite the risks. By the time they parted for the night, both carried the weight of their feelings and the reality of the life they could not escape. Conflicted hearts had never felt so alive, and in that awareness, their bond deepened even further. Chapter 9. Breaking point. Calm. They had managed to hold on to shattered in a single moment. A message arrived, brief and ominous, warning that Elena had been targeted directly. Panic surged through her, but it was quickly replaced by the steely resolve she had begun to cultivate under Dominic's guidance. Dominic appeared almost instantly at her side. His expression was unreadable, but the tension in his body was unmistakable. Every muscle was coiled, ready to act. Elena had grown used to seeing him like this, yet the fear in her chest was new and sharper than ever. This time, the threat was not distant or abstract. It was personal, aimed at her, and it brought the danger of his world crashing into their fragile bubble of trust. The hours that followed were a blur of strategy and preparation. Dominic moved with precision, issuing instructions and assessing every potential risk. Elena followed his lead, her own fear mingling with determination. For the first time, she realized just how real the stakes were. They were not simply walking through shadows anymore. The shadows were closing in, threatening to engulf them both. A confrontation finally came late that night. An intruder broke into the building, forcing Dominic and Elena into a desperate struggle for survival. They moved as one, instinct and trust guiding their actions. Every glance, every touch, every silent cue mattered. The danger was immediate, visceral, and terrifying, and yet through it all, their bond only strengthened. After the intruder fled, barely escaping, they found themselves pressed together in the quiet aftermath. Elena's hands shook, and Dominic's protective hold tightened around her. For a moment, the fear and adrenaline left them raw and exposed. "You cannot stay away from me," Dominic said quietly, his voice a mixture of frustration and relief. "I cannot protect you if you are not close. I cannot lose you. Not like this." Elena looked up at him, her own heart pounding. "We face this together," she whispered. "Whatever comes, we face it together." That night, the danger they had faced did more than test their survival instincts. It forced them to confront the depth of their feelings and the inevitability of their connection. They realized that love in their world was not a safe refuge, but a battlefield in itself. Choosing to stay together was an act of courage, and their hearts beat in tandem as they accepted the risk. By the time the first light of morning filtered through the windows, Elena and Dominic knew that nothing could be taken for granted. The world outside would continue to be dangerous, but the bond they shared had survived the breaking point. It was stronger, fiercer, and more undeniable than ever before. Chapter 10. His heart beneath the Gunt city had begun to stir with the first light of dawn. Yet for Elena and Dominic, the night's shadows still lingered in memory. The danger that had once loomed over them had not disappeared entirely, but it no longer held the same power. They had faced it together, and in doing so, they had discovered a strength far greater than fear. Elena stood by the window of her apartment, watching the streets awaken. Dominic joined her quietly, his presence familiar and comforting. There was no need for words. In the silence, they shared the unspoken acknowledgement of everything they had survived, and everything they had built together. "I cannot promise that the world will ever be safe," Dominic said softly, his hand finding hers. "But I can promise that I will be here, always." Elena turned to him, seeing the man she had come to know beyond the reputation, beyond the fear and power. She saw the kindness, the tenderness, and the courage that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. "And I will be here too," she replied. "We face it together, no matter what comes." They stepped outside together, moving through the streets with quiet confidence. The city that had once seemed menacing now felt alive and open, a reflection of the bond they shared. People moved around them, unaware of the quiet victories, the whispered promises, and the depth of connection that had grown between two unlikely hearts. Dominic held Elena close as they walked, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest. The gun, the threats, the shadows of his world, all of it faded in those moments. Here, in her presence, he could be himself completely. He could love openly, fiercely, and without reservation. Elena rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his embrace and the steadiness of his heart. She had learned that love was not about safety or certainty. It was about trust, courage, and the willingness to let someone in even when the world was full of risk. Together, they had discovered a rare and fragile kind of peace. The world outside could remain dangerous and unpredictable, but within each other, they had found a haven. Their hearts, once guarded and conflicted, now beat in unison. Dominic's heart, beneath the gun and the reputation, had finally found a place where it could belong, and Eleanor's trust and love had made it possible. As they walked into the awakening city, hand in hand, they knew that the road ahead would not be without challenges. Yet they also knew that no danger could diminish the bond they had forged. Love had prevailed, tender and fierce, and they were ready to face whatever came next together.